Welcome to Devotionary, where we make the Bible accessible and applicable. Individuality and community. Both are important to God, and nowhere is this made more clear than in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 5 through 13. In these verses, Moses outlines some very specific rules and regulations regarding life within the corporate community of Israel. This collection of individuals was made up of people of all ages and from every walk of life, but they shared a common faith and the very same ancestry. They were to function as a unified whole, but never at the expense of the individual. Membership in the community of faith did not obliterate the rights of the individual. And in these verses, Moses reminds the people of Israel that a big part of life within the community is based on extending one another common courtesy. People matter to God, and He expects His children to love one another and to dwell together in unity. For God, protecting the rights of the individual while maintaining the health of the community were equally important. When a man is newly married, he shall not go out with the army or be liable for any other public duty. He shall be free at home 1 year to be happy with his wife whom he has taken. No one shall take a mill or an upper millstone in pledge, for that would be taking a life in pledge. If a man is found stealing one of his brothers of the people of Israel, and he treats him as a slave or sells him, then that thief shall die. You shall purge the evil from your midst. Take care in a case of leprous disease to be very careful to do according to all that the Levitical priests shall direct you. As I commanded them, so you shall be careful to do. Remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the way as you came out of Egypt. When you make your neighbor a loan of any sort, you shall not go into his house to collect his pledge. You shall stand outside, and the man to whom you make the loan shall bring the pledge out to you. And if he is a poor man, you shall not sleep in his pledge. You shall restore to him the pledge as the sun sets, that he may sleep in his cloak and bless you. And it shall be righteousness for you before the Lord your God. Deuteronomy 24, verses 5 through 13. The corporate community of Israel was made up of millions of people. It was not a small collection of tribes, but a massive gathering of people from all walks of life. They shared a common bond as descendants of Abraham and were one generation removed from a life of captivity in Egypt. And as they stood poised to begin their conquering of the land God had promised to them, Moses provided them with a series of God-ordained rules for living together in unity. Like any other people group, the Israelites were going to have to work hard to maintain any sense of community as they began the process of inhabiting the land. Once a portion of the land was conquered and its former inhabitants were removed, the Israelites would find themselves focusing on their own individual needs. The corporate context required for successful warfare would be replaced by a more self-focused environment in which each Israelite looked out for his own best interests. The land would need to be cultivated, crops planted, houses built or repaired, flocks cared for, and families begun. But it was still going to be important for the people of Israel to maintain a sense of community, and that was going to require common courtesy. So Moses shared with them a series of common-sense rules for living together in unity. The first had to do with the conscription of young men for military service. If one of these men was newly married, he was to be exempted from service for 1 full year. As we've seen, marriage and the family were to be considered sacred institutions among the Israelites. And the first year of marriage was a critical and foundational time period in which the husband and wife were to be allowed to concentrate on their relationship without unneeded distractions or interruptions. The second command had to do with the relationship between a borrower and a lender. This particular regulation covered loans made between fellow Israelites. Loans were permissible, but not the charging of interest. So you could require something as collateral or pledge in order to ensure that the loan was paid back in full. But this law prohibited the taking of anything as collateral that would harm the borrower's ability to earn a living. The example given is a millstone. This was the large stone used to process grain necessary to make bread. To confiscate a millstone as collateral on a loan would leave the borrower with no means to feed his family. These rules were designed to protect the poor and needy and to prevent the people of God from taking unfair advantage of one another. Any kind of abuse of a fellow Israelite for personal gain was to be considered unacceptable behavior, and Moses provided a specific example. It was unlawful to kidnap a fellow Jew and make him your personal servant or to sell him into slavery. Most likely this is tied to the issue of debt. If a man was unable to pay back his debt, the borrower might be tempted to kidnap the man and force him into indentured servitude. In a worst-case scenario, the lender might be tempted to sell the man as a slave in order to recoup his losses. Either way, God prohibited such actions. If we skip down to verse 10, we see Moses expanding on this topic of loans and pledges. He provides the Israelites with very specific instructions regarding the collection of a pledge or collateral. If a man borrowed money, the lender was not allowed to enter his home and forcibly demand whatever was used as collateral. The rights of the lender did not supersede those of the borrower. And if the item pledged as collateral was necessary for the borrower to maintain any modicum of comfort, the lender was to allow him to keep it. These rules were designed to protect the integrity of the borrower, who in most cases was a poor person. This individual's needs would force him to use his most prized possessions as collateral, leaving him not only in debt, but devoid of the very things he needed to survive. So God placed parameters on the lending process to protect the poor. And Moses clarifies that obedience to these rules shall be righteousness for you before the Lord your God. Deuteronomy 24, verse 13. The next topic had to do with disease within the community of Israel. In Leviticus chapters 12 through 14, Moses outlines God's detailed instructions regarding leprosy. And here in Deuteronomy, Moses reminds the Israelites to take God's commands seriously. To not do so could result in the deadly spread of disease among the camp. So the Israelites were to obey everything God had told them regarding leprosy. Ignoring his commands regarding quarantine would have deadly consequences. Failing to follow his rules could bring judgment upon the entire nation. These rules, while seemingly disconnected and disparate in nature, all have to do with the corporate community of Israel. Living together was going to require that they follow God's commands together. There was no room for outliers or rebels who refused to do things God's way. He was not going to allow them to follow their own whims or create their own self-imposed rules for life. They were a community, his community. He had chosen them, and they were to be his representatives on earth. So God went out of his way to ensure that every facet of their lives was covered by his righteous decrees. Every area of life was important. Every relationship had value. There was to be no compartmentalization or isolation. Every Israelite was to live in unity with every other Israelite, regardless of their situation or station in life. Individuality was never to take precedence over community, and yet community was not to override individual rights. In a sense, Israel was to regard itself as one big family, with God as their father.